Hello everyone, this is Aaron from Cain Motorsports here, and today we're going to do something really special, something I wanted to do for a while, and make sure to get this done here. We're going to stretch some Bandolero tires here, and I'm going to give my procedure of how I in fact do that. Now, the reason you stretch Bandolero tires is actually pretty simple. First of all, it's totally legal. You're allowed to stretch tires and things like that, but stretching them in the proper way is going to give you the best results. And by stretching the tires, especially the rear tires, the idea is to give yourself a little bit higher top speed when your track has a gear rule. So if you can stretch tires an inch larger, which is possible to do. If you can stretch them an inch larger, you're going to increase your speed in some cases by maybe a mile per hour or 1.5 miles per hour, and that's actually real speed. I mean, you're talking about taking a tenth or two off of your lap time if you can increase that time. So I'll give you my procedure on how to do this, and just real quick also I should tell you is that in some cases, in a lot of cases, I'm not necessarily recommending you do this because do this safely, because I don't want anyone to blow themselves up. Stay away from these tires when they're stretching, because if there's some sort of catastrophic failure, it's on you and it's not on me. All right, now, next thing to first of all understand is tire selection and so forth, okay? Now, when you buy tires from Hoosier, okay, what you're going to want to do is, if you have a chance, you should measure them out, okay? And some people like to go ahead and take the tires that kind of their serial numbers match and things like that. I don't really care. What I like to do is just take the biggest tires I could possibly measure. In this case, you can see I have this one marked off as it was flat. It was 55 and 5/16. So flat, again, this one's also the same size. I've had some other tires larger than this before, and that is 100% okay. So usually what I tend to expect is if I can measure it flat at 55 and 16th, if I put like 20 psi in it, and that's usually a standard number that I like to use, you'll get this to grow about an inch, you know what I mean, after letting it sit around. Okay, but we don't want a tire at 50 or at 56 and 5/16. We want a tire at like a 56 and 3/4 or 57 inches. And yes, I did say 57 inches. Okay, it is possible to stretch these enough where I have gotten out two tires over 57 inches. One is almost 57.5, and that's a significant advantage if you can do it. So the first thing you do is you get mounted on your rims, and then you fill them up to 80 psi. Now this is higher than is recommended. As I said before, you should not do this and if it's not safe, okay? But these tires have I put an 80 psi in them to stretch them, and then we're good to go. And you can see here what I do is I generally go ahead and measure them at 80 psi and then keep a track on how far they have stretched. So at 80 psi, this one's 56 and 3/4. So you can see it definitely stretched out significantly higher than this flat number here, right? Okay, but that's with 80 psi. After we're gonna heat it up, and this number is obviously going to get larger, and that's going to be the amount that we're able to stretch it, okay? This one's almost at 57 at this juncture, shall we say, okay? So let's get these nice and hot, and I'll show you how I do that. Okay, so now let's talk about how we're going to get these hot. A lot of guys like to go ahead and use ovens and things like that. I don't have a spare oven around, and my wife would kill me if I would put tires in the oven. So instead, I like to use it a little different way, and I think this is even better because the electricity, or at least the energy to get the tires hot, is free. And that is, of course, using solar radiation rather than going ahead. A lot of people just go ahead and do this where they just stick the tires out in the sun or things like that. I've done it with plastic bags before and things like that, just trying to heat them up anyways. But this is by far the best solution that I've ever found for going ahead and stretching tires, and that is to create a solar kind of a tire greenhouse. It's pretty cool. All right, so here's the tire greenhouse that I've gone ahead and made. All it is it's I got all those materials from Menards here. It's just some angle, some wood angle that I've gone ahead and painted black. And then once you go ahead and do that, you take some acrylic and you just cut some acrylic and you actually just glue it, and you can screw it into the actual wooden areas on the outside here. So on the bottom, I went ahead and I have like a rubber gasket to try and go ahead and keep all that in. So I put a rubber gasket around the outside. This is only part of it though. You can put this around the tires. It sits right over the top of the tires, and it's really cool. But the other part of it, I actually made some solar reflectors to get even more sun concentrated on those tires here. So in this case, I got an emergency blanket, like one of those like real cheap emergency blankets you can get off Amazon. And then I just used some contact cement or some glue, and I glued it to just some real thin pieces of cheap wood. And the idea is I'm going to go set this in the sun, and it's going to be a very, very warm day today here in Wisconsin. I'm talking about it's going to be upper 80s, almost 90 degrees. And we're going to go ahead and angle these solar reflectors at the sun, at the greenhouse, and of course the tires will be inside. Now the temperatures on the inside of this get very, very, very hot, and they get upwards of 100. I've seen when I've used the barometer on the tires themselves, they got to like 150 degrees and probably even hotter in some cases. And I will let them sit out in the sun all day long. And I mean all day long. I'll set it and I'll forget it. I won't let anybody go by it either, because I'm afraid at some point I don't want any sort of catastrophic failure. But this works out pretty good, and we'll see the results once I have it set up. One other quick note I forgot to mention is when you're stretching tires, really only stretching new tires works. For whatever reason, after you have a tire that's been on the car and it's run a few races, they don't want to stretch very well after that. So I'm not sure exactly why that is. Some sort of memory built into the tire. The rubber gets a little harder or whatever like that, but only bother stretching brand new tires right away, rather than going ahead and worrying about trying to stretch tires that have been on the car. It just doesn't work out very well. All right, we're set up here. Now, right now it's about 9 o'clock in the morning. The sun is just going on to this particular spot of my driveway here. These tires, this is the spot I normally stretch on. They're going to get very, very, very hot. There's 80 psi in them, and nobody is going to go around this all day long, because just in case something terrible happens here. So all day long, we will go ahead and stretch these tires, and then we'll see what the results are. Okay, so here are our tires, okay? Now, yesterday, if you remember, I always record all this stuff on the inside of the tire to kind of look at it like this. We started off yesterday with 80 psi in the tire. This particular one is 80 psi. We went ahead and stretched it out, right? And after it was hot, we left it out all day, so I brought it in, and I left it out there, and when it came in at hot, it was 57 and 9/16. So it almost grew. It grew about 3/4 of an inch. I've had these things grow an inch before, and that's usually when you know you really stretch the heck out of them. Now, what I do is after they get hot, I let them sit overnight at pressure. So I let them cool off at 80 psi after they're stretched out, and they shrink a tiny little bit, but it's still for the most part about 3/4 of an inch that we got here of stretch. Then what I do is after overnight, I'll go ahead and I'll basically reduce the pressure to 20 psi, let them sit for a couple of hours, and then measure them again. And of course, after you do that, you let it at 20 psi, you still get a tire that is 56 and 7/8 inches. Now this is an enormous Bandolero tire. Okay, having something that is at 20 psi at 56 and 7/8 inches is huge. Now, if you can go ahead and keep that, you are going to have a speed advantage in terms of where you hit the rev limiter down at the end of the straightaway. And if you look at the other tire, we have similar results here. We started off at 56 and 15/16. Went ahead and went ahead and got it real hot, 57 5/8, and this is again still 56 and 13/16 at 20 psi. So this is pretty incredible. When you start to look at these results this way. I'm pretty happy with this. Okay, so final note when you wrap up, okay, one other very, very, very important tip on when you're stretching tires is that in between races and when the tires are not being used, okay, make sure they're on rims, and not only make sure on rims, make sure they have 80 psi in them, okay? You want to keep these tires stretched out. If if I took these tires and took all the air out of them, they would shrink back down a lot. Not completely. They would still be a little bit larger than they normally would be. But by going ahead and keeping the air pressure in them, after a race is over, you pump the snot out of the tires. Put them up to 70 psi, 60 psi, whatever you can get in those tires, especially the rear ones, to raise that pressure up so they don't get smaller. You get to and leave them in there all week long. And if you're going to scale the car or whatever, you can reduce them, but then pump them right back up. This will prevent your tires from getting smaller in the long run. So again, if you have any questions or any other particular ways that you do this yourself, go ahead and leave a comment below, and I'd love to take a look. Thank you.